Good morning, Steve here in Sydney on the Lane Gnosis website truebluehealer.com, where in just 20 minutes you get physical evidence that you're going to get some help from a second intelligence that enables you to fight through the information overload that we all suffer today. Just 20 minutes and it's free. And you'll get some help such as website addresses literally typed into your head. Okay, that sort of thing can happen within a week of learning layman's gnosis. Okay, so I'll leave you with that and get on with the main thing today, which is all about Islam. There's quite a few ways to analyse any religious textbook, and one way is to use statistical analysis. This has been done by a fellow called Bill Warner, a PhD physicist, who's obviously a whiz at statistics, and he's gone through the Quran and other religions too. He's gone through the Quran and he's given basically word counts to ascertain the weighting given to a particular theme by how many words are devoted to it. So it's a measurement of emphasis is the word count on a particular theme or issue, you see. So that sounds like an easy way to start off to get a quick appreciation of the Quran and that sort of thing. The Quran actually consists of 3 books. There's the basic Quran, there's the a feature called the Sunnah, which is the autobiography of Muhammad, which is actually contained in another book called the Sirah. And then there's yet another book called the Hadith, which is supposedly anecdotes and stories and wise sayings attributed to Muhammad, you see. So there's actually 3 books of the Quran if you want to get a full understanding of what it says. Statistical analysis makes some sense out of it, but you have to know something in the first place, that the Quran was deliberately jumbled up to make it impossible to understand. It is claimed that the verses are all numbered, so you can figure out the historic sequence, but that's not how the modern Quran presents today. The modern Quran presents today as the longest chapters first, and then progressively shorter chapters toward the end. This is decidedly done by someone called Uthman, who's a 7th, 8th century caliph, supreme commander, CEO, whatever you want to call him, and he decided to jumble the order of all the verses in the Quran. Surprise, surprise. But the statistician Bill Warner says you can literally reassemble it on a computer, putting all the verses in the right order, and then you can read the historical devolution of this Quran, you see, according to the way it was intended. Mysteriously, Uthman, having made this wrong assembly, then burned all the preceding documents that led him to put this together. So there's a lot of questions about why would you burn the original information base? Why would you do this? This is at about the year 700, okay? About the year 700, 60 years after Muhammad allegedly died, 632, okay? So in the epoch 600 to 700 AD, the Arab Empire exploded out of the Saudi Arabian peninsula that we know today and conquered countries right across Africa all the way to India, you see. Now the strange thing is, the first 10 countries conquered in the first 50 years, or the first 100 years, did not mention Muhammad by name, never used the word Muslim to describe their conquerors, and never mentioned the word Islam to describe their conquerors. So there's no contemporary records that Muhammad, Islam, or the Muslim concept ever existed before about 700 AD, some 60 years after he allegedly died, 632. Just let that sink in for a minute. And then Uthman comes along and he decides to compile a Quran, which is so badly written that it seems to be made by a committee of politicians who aren't very good at their job. Okay? So, bearing in mind that the Arab Empire has been established, the Christian populations of Egypt were crushed and converted to Islam. Believe it or not, there were a lot of Arab Catholics before the Islamic Empire existed. And the Christians in Egypt, the Coptic Christians, were greatly displaced. There are only 1% of the population surviving there today in Egypt. And they've recently been beheaded by ISIS. You probably read that somewhere in the shocking news. So we've got the situation here where we've got a diversity of peoples being dominated by this newly established empire. It's been around for 60, 70, 80 years. They've crushed all the feeble nations opposing them. They're occupying them. And what do they need? Well, they notice the unifying effects of Judaism on Jewish people, which held them together wherever they went. They had books with rules and regulations about how they should live a goodly life. So it seems Uthman invented a religion based on holy writings which he burned before as he put them into a final edition, which is how he wanted his empire run, according to this character that was sort of created out of history, Muhammad. He wasn't even commemorated in any format at all till 681, when someone's face called Muhammad turned up on a coin in 681, some 50 years after the alleged death of Muhammad, you see. So religion was seen as a unifying concept to dominate, control and regulate many, many different peoples in an ever-expanding empire. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. That's been done. The Romans did it too, okay, with Christianity, that sort of thing. Now, in light of the fact that there's a black hole, there's just no evidence of anything written by anyone conquered by these people, these Arab horsemen. There's no records anywhere in North Africa before the year 700 AD, okay? So Uthman came along, he's the Arab Caliph, and he does this overarching religion which applies to everybody that he conquers. Few other people survive. It becomes obvious that this religion was sort of cobbled together to help hold an empire together. That's commonly done. Now, Bill Warner's gone through the three holy books, the Hadith, the Sirah and the Quran, put them all together, got them chapters in the right order, had a computer analysis go through it, and discovered that only about 35% of the Quran is about living a goodly life. The other 64% is devoted to the politics of the unbeliever and what to do with them. And it ranges from taxing them to decapitating them, putting them to the sword, burning them, ripping them apart, chopping their feet off, chopping their arms off, that sort of thing. There's all levels of violence toward the unbeliever, the atheist, and anyone who doesn't agree that Allah is the one true God, you see. Anyone who's got a different opinion basically is a loser, you're going to die. So that's 64% of the word count in the three holy books of Islam, and it gives you the distinct realisation that this is a political ideology and definitely not a religion. It is predominantly politics, the politics of conquest and dominance, okay, and empire building. Just as evil as any other empire building system. Now, the story of the origin of Islam, the one that's given, one that is supplied, is kind of strange, really. It's actually rooted deep in Judaism. It is a Judaic religion. It's a Jewish religion. And it's just claimed that one of the patriarchs, I think it was Moses or something, had a son called Ishmael, and his descendants became the Muslims. The Quran talks about King David and all sorts of people as revered people, a long line of Jewish heroes going back to Abraham. that sort of thing. So it's definitely a Jewish religion, no question about it. And there's two stages of conversion in the Quran mentioned. Muhammad spent years trying to preach to people to get them to turn to the Arab form of Judaism that he was preaching. Basically, it's Judaism for Arabs. He only got 150 converts in 9 years or something. So then he left Mecca because it was full of silly pagans who wouldn't listen. They were too busy worshipping the sun and the moon, which later became the emblem of Islam, the crescent moon. So he left Mecca, allegedly, left Mecca and went to Medina, where in just 12 months, by threatening to decapitate people and actually doing it, he scored 100,000 converts. So the convert yield was much greater when he turned to mass murder as a conversion technique. And I know this sounds kind of strange, like a Monty Python sketch, but it's what actually happened according to the Quran. It is written this way. The numbers are supplied. So Muhammad wasn't much of a preacher amongst the pagans. No, hardly anyone listened to him, but he soon discovered that decapitation and mass slaughter was the most rewarding form of getting people to see things his way. And from there the empire grew. If he'd stayed just being a preacher, he would have disappeared at best. There would be no Islam today. It's only the addition of murder as a conversion technique, the threat of murder, threat of death, that Islam exists today. It is a murderous political regime, as simple as that. I haven't read the Quran in detail because I find it boring. I do see it every Ramadan time. It's played on a giant plasma TV screen. My wife is Muslim, and she says it's good luck, good fortune, or a devout thing to do if you play the Quran all the way through Ramadan, you see. And special wishes are granted if you, good fortunate things happen if you get to play the Quran all the way through. And so you can get this wonderful CD, which is really good. It's like the turning of a book, and it chants it all the way through. And there's Arabic, French and English subtitles, you see. And one of the things I've noticed is the obsession it's got with the unbelievers, the atheists, the non-believers. It goes on and on and on about them. What are we going to do about these people? What can we do? They don't know what we know. They are, devoid of knowledge, unbelievers in Allah. There's hundreds of pages of that in the electronic Quran that I have seen. Now here's the funny bit. I haven't seen anything in this Quran that goes past me every Ramadan time. I haven't seen anything about jihad. There's no word jihad I've never seen on the screen. I'm wondering where the hell it is. So I asked my wife, of course, and I go, where's all the jihad bits? And she says, that's not the Quran, that's not Islam, you see. So I've asked other people, do you know that Muhammad probably killed millions of people getting his conversions? Anyone who didn't convert was just killed. And he got what was left over as converting to Islam. Did you know this? That he was a great general. More than anything else, that's how he got famous. And everyone looks at me blankly, all these Muslims, these God-fearing, Allah-fearing Muslims. They look at me and I go, well, what are you people doing? It turns out none of them read the Quran. I've questioned a few of my relatives. They don't read the Quran at all. They don't know what's in it, really. They go through the devotions of Islam, the prayers, not 5 times a day. A lot of people in the Western world just can't fit that in with a normal work day. Praying 5 times a day is quite an impost. It's not really compatible with the Western way of life. So a lot of Muslims sort of half adopt and just stop doing that when they come to Western countries, you see. So they're very much namesake Muslims. The same way Christians don't know the Bible. A number of fundamentalist Christians have been examined, given little tests on, fundamentals, basics of the Bible, and they can't answer basic questions on the Bible while they profess to be devout Christians. So pretty much the same as Muslims, I'm told. A significant feature of the Quran text is that it's full of contradictions, where one thing is said and then precisely the opposite is said, even on the same page. And this carries on right through this Arab holy book. And it's called abrogation. To me, it means the whole thing becomes meaningless if it says one thing and then says the opposite. Because what happens is the apologists always quote the nice one at the beginning, which is always the first verse, typically. And it's Islam is a religion of peace. And then another, on the same page, it can say, decapitate the believers. So what are you supposed to do? Well, depending on who you're talking to, you pick one or the other. That's the dishonesty of Islam. It's called dualistic logic, where you've got two answers to every question, depending on what page you're reading and who you're talking to. Okay, now it's called abrogation, where, well, to me it actually means how meaningless a book is with that many contradictions. And the book itself does say in one verse, don't let the believers meditate on the many contradictions in this book. That's a verse in the Quran. And on the first page it says, you cannot question this book. It is beyond question. It is the word of God. Well, you'd get the impression that God made a lot of mistakes if you believe it is the word of God. So this seems to be why Islam asks people to memorize the Quran by rote rather than understanding it, because you can't understand its many, many contradictions. And rote learning turns your reasoning powers off and makes you concentrate on just the sound of something in a dead language. Okay? Forced rote learning and non-comprehension of what you are learning seems to be a brain dumbing down technique which has held back the Islamic world since the 7th century. It's been applied up till about the 16th, 17th century, and that's why you cannot think of a single Islamic invention or scientific breakthrough. There's not an Islamic car, there is no Islamic space program, there's no Islamic processed food that you can think of. Can you think of an Islamic invention in your house, an appliance that you're grateful that the Middle Eastern peoples invented? There just isn't one, because they're too busy being backward, memorising meaningless tracts of holy books that contradict each other. That's basically what Islam seems to be doing. I'm not just making this up. This comes from learned people doing computerised analysis of the Quran. And this is just not my opinion. In the playlist, I'll give you a couple of short videos to watch of Arabs speaking. Mysteriously, somehow, miraculously, they get onto Middle Eastern television and they denounce their own cultures as being backward and holding back the entire Arab Islamic world. And they do it in no uncertain terms. One of them's a poor man and one of them's a rich man. And it's quite an eye-opener to listen to these two men talking about the influence that Islam has had on the Middle Eastern world and how it's been held back for centuries while the Western world has powered ahead. Like it or not, the much maligned European white male has just spent 500 years elevating the living standard of the entire world. Everything you can think of, from Copernicus to Newton to telescopes to oscilloscopes to microscopes to sonar scopes, X-rays, medicine, antibiotics, X-rays, space travel, motor cars, oil-based economy, telephones, satellites, everything you can think of, electricity, steam engines, all came from the entrepreneurial activities and the inventive activities of the European white male, who is forever under attack today, even in very modern movies like Star Wars. That's an anti-white European male movie. He's specifically excluded from it. They don't play any lead roles, and the Jewish producer said that there's too many white people in Star Wars. This one I'm going to make is going to have anything but white people in it. Okay? The business of Islam having two versions of everything, a peaceful one and a violent paragraph that contradicts it. They use the Islam is a religion of peace trick to get themselves in small numbers into other nations to infest them. And then as the numbers increase, they start becoming militant, reading out the militaristic interpretation of the same question. So once they get up to a certain number, and that's going to be a problem for Europe unless Islam is confronted, because there's women from Africa, Muslims from Africa, brought up as Muslims, unable to read. They go and live in Sweden, and then guess what they do for the first time in their life? A woman from Africa in Sweden, she had the peace and quiet, and she learned to read. She learned to read the Quran, and she said it horrified her and utterly rejected it. Because she'd been an unthinking Muslim in Africa, she didn't have much chance to do anything else. Because in a strict society like that, for apostasy, that's declaring yourself an atheist, you can be legally killed by anyone who hears you speak that. That's not murder. Okay, that's not murder. That's okay for a Muslim to do that. You can kill anyone who's an unbeliever. There's a let out for all kinds of psychopathic behaviours in the Quran. So it's very much a death cult. It really is. It's kept in place by the apostasy rule that you can't leave Islam without risk of death. So now you know why people like Salman Rushdie have these fatwas put on them, you see. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Now, how did we ever get to that? Scholars point out that every time Muhammad had a political problem, or his background writers had a political problem, how do we solve this problem? Muhammad is said to have had revelations, you see, and the revelations were not always correct. And in one situation, his answers, his revelations were so horrifically wrong that he retracted them. And he said, sorry, I was accidentally channeling Satan. Muhammad says this in the Quran, and this is where you get the phrase satanic verses. Muhammad's repeating satanic verses by his own admission. Unbelievable, isn't it? They call this a religion. They believe he's the one true messenger of God. If anything, he would have to be the one definitely not a true messenger, with gaffes like that. I'm sorry, I'm channeling Satan today. I got that wrong. Start again. Today's Tuesday, right? Start again. Now, just talking about the so-called Islamic invasion of Europe at the moment, which is a major geopolitical problem. Is it really a problem of Islam? Well, not precisely. I'll just tell you this. The criminal behaviour of these people coming over the border, they're all from different races of the world, different parts of the world. And I'll tell you where criminal behaviour comes from, and although it's allowed by their religion to varying degrees, criminality is known to be genetic, and this was proven in British prisons in the 19th century, where they were adopting children out of long-serving prisoners, and it was discovered that when you put the son of a hardened criminal, a violent criminal, you get the child and you bring them up in a house with lots of money and affection and best schooling and loving parents and all that sort of thing. Guess what? They still turn out to be criminals. That was known and understood, scientifically verified in the 19th century. It was re-verified in the 20th century, in the 40s and the 50s. So there's no question that your level of crime is genetic. And that's according to your background, where you come from. The same as you are born smart or you are born dumb, and you can't change that very much. You can't really do it, like it or not. And this is a thing that nobody wants to talk about in these left-wing days where everybody's equal and everybody gets a prize just for turning up that day. So The lefties would have us believe that sub-Saharan Africans with an average IQ of 75, I have the figures, that sub-Saharan Africans with an average IQ of 75 can slip into Europe and become jumbo pilots or anything just by stepping over the border and getting a different passport. It simply isn't true. In fact, they're unable to do even the lowliest jobs, and there's plenty of native Europeans who can do it. They've got 6, 7, 8% unemployment all over Europe. They really don't need unskilled people who can never be trained up to be skilled added to their population mix. They just don't need it. They haven't got the money to support them. Their high crime rate is a genetic tendency they bring with them. It existed in their home societies, and they simply bring a workload to the European police, which those countries can't afford either. A German social statistics professor has already pointed out it was known years ago that Syrian people, their education system just isn't good enough. They can barely count and read and write. They're unable to do the average job in Germany, he said. And as a clue, there's a 3-year upgrade course to turn a Syrian person into a modern-day German-speaking, competent average worker. And guess what? 70% of Syrians fail this course. They can't pass. So it raises the question of, are all people ideal migrants? Can any kind of migrant go to any other place on the planet and live? It's based on this foolish notion of absolute equality demanded by the lefties from the United Nations, that you can't discriminate against anybody in terms of intelligence or ability. You've got to take impossible to employ into your country and just put up with them. None of these people in doing all this terrorism in Europe, none of them are professional people. Jihadi John was one, wasn't he? But most of them are on benefits until the day they blow themselves up somewhere. I'll give you some links to all these things I'm telling you about so you can make up your own mind. Join your own dots. But the fact that Muslims have got like a double statement for everything, they've got a nice loving statement and a militaristic death statement, always a particularly ugly statement, and they use the soft ones to get into your country, and then as their numbers increase they start using the aggressive militaristic passages from the Quran. They've taken over numerous countries like that, and I'm just going to give you the body count, which you're not aware of, for Islam since 632 AD, for want of a better phrase. We think it's 1400 years. The number of people either been killed directly but via decapitation is an horrific number, and some history's been kept from us by apologists and by the fact that we have a Western slant. We look at things like Western people. One estimate I found in a YouTube video, a lecture by a scientist, was the body count for Islam is about 250 million people over 1400 years that they have killed. And one way they killed people is to take them into slavery. It is said that Africans have suffered abominably at the hands of Muslims because 120 million black Africans have been taken into slavery, and there's a very high death rate, about 90% death rate, because of, I don't really want to say this, but they're castrated, and most of them die, okay? They just don't make it. But most historians don't want to say those things. And that's one of the most horrific aspects of Islam. It's covered up by the apologists. It's just too gruesome to talk about. And of course, genital mutilation of females is widely carried on still in Islamic countries. And it's kind of fascinating how all these left-wing people in Europe writing all these newspaper columns forever keep deriding European white males while totally ignoring the genital mutilation of all these Muslim invaders of Europe. what they do to their own women. I mean, even the Nazis didn't mutilate their own women. And, you know, Nazis are supposedly one of the worst standards we've got for cruelty. Even they didn't mutilate their own women like Muslims do. So think about that. There's a history of Islam that you don't know much about, and that is their conquest of India. It is said by people who did know India in the 1890s, I've got a link for you, where someone estimates the death of people in Western India as the Arab Empire, the Muslim Empire went eastward toward India, that something like 400 million people perished at the hands of Muslims. I think it was 400, or was it 600? It was a huge amount. I remember 600 on the page now. And that's historians' best estimates for the death toll over 1,000 years it spent invading, chipping away at the western end of India. 600 million people is the figure. And that came from a Muslim historian. A Muslim historian, his name is quoted, and this was written up in a lecture or something in London in the 1890s by someone visiting from that part of India. Okay, so it's something you've never heard about, and you might well consider it. It's about the most bloodthirsty killing machine on earth is Islam. Can you think of a greater, a worse, a more lethal killing machine that's got a greater body count? I can't. Even the Mongols didn't go that far. Muslim extremists in Britain are now in sufficient numbers so that they're threatening, they want to, their long-term desire is to turn Buckingham Palace into a mosque. I don't know why they want to live in England, although I've got one idea. Its benefits are twice as high as that of France. They leave France, and you know what? They complain that French people won't talk to them. They don't like France at all. It's got low benefits. They can't get a job. And they complain that French won't talk to them. Well, everybody knows the French are a little bit arrogant. That's just their nature. Permit them to be what they are. That's their nature to be like that. You say something to them in French, they'll listen to you. What's wrong with learning their language? But they go to Britain, they risk their lives getting across the railway tracks in the Calais Tunnel to get the extra high benefits in Britain. And now some of the extremists are waving flags around saying they want to turn Buckingham Palace into a mosque, for Christ's sake. So can I just tell you this little thing you may not know? Elizabeth I, one of the greatest queens England ever had, she passed a law saying Muslims were not allowed into the English realm in her reign. Yes, they were not to be allowed in, okay? She had more brains than we have today. Maybe we've got to go back to our history books and get some lessons. It's a pretty sad state of affairs when we are repeating history in tragic ways that we don't have to do. We've only got to look at a bit of history. It's all there. Just dig it up and have a look and say, we're not going to make this mistake twice. But we're all too lazy to read a little bit of history, it would seem. Today's invasion of Europe, which has been orchestrated by George Soros, I'll give you a whole lot of links on what he's doing. He's doing everything he can to dismantle the Western world so that it's overrun by, the advanced Western world must be overrun by third world people. Right? That's George Soros's, he's a Jewish activist, billionaire activist, right? Okay, he wants to destroy the entire Western world. Muslim people have been used to invade Europe, to try and invade Europe. Successful time because the European people are waking up slowly. Can I just fill you in on a little bit of history? Muslim attempts to invade Europe, there were two of them, 1529 and 1681. Okay, now 1529 was the time of Martin Luther, and Martin Luther was doing some serious criticisms of the Catholic Church, and he was ridiculing them for making things up and just corruptly producing more and more ceremonies that had no connection to the Bible at all. Anyway, with the invention of printing, he was able to get his ideas out to a lot of people. And Germany became a hotbed of religious rebellion, you see. 1529 this is, right? Now, war started, went on for decades and centuries, in fact. And what happened was kings and princes from all over Europe who had been crowned by the Vatican used to give a king religious approval. Basically, the divine right of kings was installed on somebody's head in the form of a crown provided by the Vatican, you see. So they controlled Europe. What they didn't like was the idea that this Martin Luther character was inciting Germans to set up their own local churches, the Lutheran Church. Protestantism was getting a toehold, you see, because of printing. And people were waking up to the fact that, golly, once you see the Bible written in the local language of German, now I know what they're talking about. Things change and people start thinking for themselves. So, what do you think the Vatican could have done in 1529? Can you guess? They invited, the Vatican, the Pope invited the Ottoman Turks to invade Austria through Vienna. Southeastern tip of Germany is Austria, and once you get through Vienna, you go ravaging through that little thin country called Austria, and then you have Germany ahead of you. And the Ottoman Turks were asked to decapitate the Germans who wanted to defect from the Catholic Church. So how bad are the Muslims when we've produced popes that would organise the decapitation of 30% of Germans? As it was, the invasion didn't work. It was a disgrace. Mother Nature intervened. There was 12 months of rain and the siege cannon couldn't fire in heavy rain. So that 1529 invasion of Vienna failed dismally. Then they tried again in 1681. They were more confident this time. The weather was a whole lot better. The defenders were greatly outnumbered. Only 15,000 defenders in this big fortress at Vienna. But a brilliant piece of battlefield manoeuvring enabled the elite Polish cavalry to charge straight down the middle and take out the enemy pavilion tent that was housing all their generals, and the whole battle turned into chaos and a rout. And for the second time, Europe was saved from Muslim invasion, which would have resulted in mass decapitations. So they want to do it now. This is the third go. They invaded Spain too. Do you remember that? And I've seen it posited, I'm still considering this, that the so-called Spanish Inquisition was actually to get rid of closet Muslims who might sort of convert to stay in Spain as sleeper agents and do damage to the church. Catholic Church was paranoid about losing its grip on Europe. Right or wrong, they were. And Spain was a staunchly Catholic country. So I've given you some history there, that the Spanish Inquisition may not have been as bad as it's been portrayed by modern Jewish investigators who found themselves the victim of it all too often. But the function of the Spanish Inquisition, I have read, and I'm still considering whether this is true or not, I'll find you a link for it, was actually to prevent Muslim stay-behinds from white-anting the Catholic Church in Spain from the inside by false conversions. Most Muslims went home because of an argument about their leadership in North Africa or something. And one day the Spaniards woke up and most of the Muslims were gone from southern Spain. They just left it empty. So that's something you can look up. Perhaps a reread of history in light of what you've been told. I'll give you some links for all this. You can make up your own mind. But history is a wonderful thing to look at because you can see the mistakes made in previous times. And do we want to keep repeating the same endless mistakes today? I sure hope not. Well, you have to deal with someone called Angela Merkel now, don't you? Lord knows what's besetting her. Is it just dementia or what? I don't know. She has no legal right to override her parliament and her party. She can't speak as an individual, though she did and invited millions of people in. There's 25,000 people a week coming into Germany now. They can't possibly cope with that level of influx, and that's got to be stopped, and a lot of them are going to have to be deported. Sweden's changed its tune. 1975 they wanted to naively bring in a whole lot of people because they were sick and tired of looking at their own pale faces. All blue-eyed, pale-faced, blonde hair, blah, blah, blah. So boring we all are. Let's bring in some colour from the rest of the world, a bit of cultural diversity. Well, so doing that has turned Sweden into the rape capital of the world. Okay, they've imported some genetic criminality from different races. Europeans have a low criminality rate. It's a genetic thing. Other races don't. They have a higher crime rate because it's genetic, not because they're actually Muslim. It's a genetic thing. This is proven scientifically over and over again. So can you afford to blindly import people into Europe who've got a high crime rate that you can't afford? You can't get enough police to hold them down. Police are overwhelmed at border checkpoints at the moment. Austria, Germany. They're having to employ special police just to police migrants. Just to police all these unwanted migrants that Angela Merkel brought in illegally. She's not allowed to speak off her own bat as a position of Chancellor and enable people to flow into other countries all over Europe. I think this could be the end of Europe, because apart from open borders, Europe's really just a currency, isn't it? I think it may be the end of Europe as we know it, but it will be better if it becomes compartmentalised again and has national boundaries. I think that could be a better way to go, but I don't think letting enclaves of Muslims stay there with Sharia law, wanting to turn Buckingham Palace into a mosque, is the right way to go for a healthy, happy future for all concerned. They've really got to be repatriated to the paradises they came from, the Sharia paradises. Another thing is the breathtaking hypocrisy of Israel, which is using lobby groups and billionaire George Soros to shoehorn millions of migrants, unwanted, unusable, unassimilatable migrants into Europe, to destroy Europe, because they've always hated white people for thousands of years. It's inbuilt into their religion, so that's another problem. That's not Islam, that's Judaism. But both religions are full of hate. That's a fascinating thing you learn by reading the Talmud, and that'll have to be another video. The world is motivated by so much hate. Black people are not allowed into Israel. The lead black star of the new Star Wars movie has complained on Facebook that he's not allowed into Israel. His Jewish film producer told him that, even though he's a fabulous movie star earning millions, playing leading roles, he's not allowed into Israel because he's the wrong colour, he's the wrong race. And black refugees from Africa, thinking they could have got into Israel, have been kept in, they're being penned up in camps, and guess what? They're being dropped on Sweden. They're being flown to Sweden and dumped there. And then there's another factor of, it's quite blatantly admitted, a woman called Barbara Lerner Spector. I'll provide a playlist link to her following this video, and you'll see that this invasion of Europe is actually being modulated and moderated and accelerated by Jewish interests who want to bury all of Europe. It often defeats me what the deep down purpose of all these things is. It seems to be deep down hate. Guides just too many people on this planet. It's their basic motivation while they smile at you and pretend to be religions of peace. And both Judaism and Islam are not really religions of peace at all. They're about annihilation of their enemies, anyone who disagrees with them. The Talmudic Judaism, which is based on just annihilation of all other peoples around them. the inability to get along with other people. And this is the basis of anti-Semitism. Everywhere they go, they can't get along with other groups. Thrown out of 45 countries, it's this attitude that whoever they're with should be annihilated that is the problem. Anyway, here's Barbara Lerner Spector in her dulcet tones. The word Spector means ghost. She adopted that. Name-changing Jews everywhere do this. I don't know why. It's all part of their espionage attitude that they have toward everybody, that no one can be confronted truthfully and openly. Everything's got to be done in some underhanded fashion. But here's Barbara Lerner Spector.
Such.
As we heard, there are people in Sweden who support Israel and have a deep sense of the injustice of the present situation. It's these people who give hope to those who still believe that things will get better here. One of them is Barbara Spector, a former American who made Aliyah and then 10 years ago, with the help of the government of Sweden, set up a non-denominational institute of Jewish learning with the Greek name of Paideia here in Stockholm. She believes the current wave of anti-Semitism in Sweden will pass and that Jews have an important role to play in a country undergoing profound change.
I think there's a resurgence of anti-Semitism because at this point in time, Europe has not yet learned how to be multicultural. And I think we're going to be part of the throes of that transformation, which must take place. Europe is not going to be the monolithic societies that they once were in the last century. Jews are going to be at the center of that. It's a huge transformation for Europe to make. They are now going into a multicultural mode, and Jews will be resented because of our leading role. But without that leading role and without that transformation, Europe will not survive.
Paideia
I think there's a resurgence of anti-Semitism because at this point in time, Europe has not yet learned how to be multicultural. And I think we're going to be part of the throes of that transformation, which must take place. Europe is not going to be the monolithic societies that they once were in the last century. Jews are going to be at the center of that. It's a huge transformation for Europe to make. They are now going into a multicultural mode, and Jews will be resented because of our leading role. But without that leading role and without that transformation, Europe will not survive.